Alright, today's video is a special one. It starts off with a variant of William Lane Craig's cosmological argument for God, takes a sharp right into relativity, slams us face first back into the fine-tuning argument, and then we go full quantum woo. This one is a gish gallop of nonsense wrapped up with a god-done-it bow passed off as some kind of insight. You know, the apologetics crowd stays in their lane and doesn't veer off into woo land too often, but this one, man, it took me places. I'm not sure why I did this to myself, but I hope you enjoy it.
Hey guys, this is Real Rice Talks. You know, a 20-year-old being able to relate to the viewer as closely as possible because I'm still young.
So we're just gonna start off with you throwing away all possibility of you relating to me, a 42-year-old transgender woman. Alright, cool. I'm glad we're getting off on the right foot.
So, the title of this video is that I have proof that God exists.
You know, despite some of the accusations I got from some of the trolls here on YouTube, I actually do look forward to hearing legitimate arguments and proof for God's existence. Usually there's an interesting conversation to be had or some intellectual rabbit hole to dig down to really understand what the other side is saying. I mean, after all, that's partially why I make these videos, to expose myself to new ideas and arguments. I feel it helps keep my mind sharp as I age.
And you might be thinking, this kid is crazy as heck, but the truth is, there is proof of God's existence. There really is. And the thing is, God makes it so simple for us to realize, yet people overcomplicate it far too much. And that's what's the problem with us humans, is that we have this knowledge to overcomplicate things way too much.
Now, in principle, I agree with this sentiment. People have a bad habit of overcomplicating things, especially when it comes to things like trying to prove the existence of an all-knowing, all-powerful, timeless, spaceless being. I think the overcomplication in this case tricks people into thinking that what they're saying either makes sense or is irrefutable in some manner because it's so complicated. But that's a failure of the human mind. For some reason, be it either through social conditioning or evolution, we tend to believe someone with a complicated message more than we tend to believe a simplified one. And this is backed up by dual process theory, where humans respond better to confidence and fluency over content. I think this is partially the fault of our education system here in America. For some reason, we tend to think that complicated stuff is hard and therefore worthy of some higher level of respect than things we've deemed uncomplicated. This is reflected in the way society treats people of different working classes. A job with a lower earning potential is often shunned compared to a job with a much higher earning potential. A janitor is looked down on while a programmer is elevated to near godhood. It's the same with apologetics claims. The more complicated the argument sounds, the more likely people seem to be to believe the claim without investigating it further. While in actuality, the very simple claims are the ones that then tend to be the most reasonable and, conversely, the ones that tend to be the most difficult to rebuke.
So, this is the proof that I have of God's existence. And it's so simple. The proof of God's existence is creation. You heard that right. The proof of God's existence is creation itself.
Why is it that theists have such a love for the cosmological argument? This is a very common claim and might seem intuitive at first, but it deserves careful examination. You know how I just finished saying how simple arguments tend to be the most difficult to rebuke? Well, the cosmological argument is a far more complicated argument that's dressed in simplicity's clothes because it's actually quite a complex one. What makes it so complex is that you have to prove the premises of the argument before you can accept its conclusions. The cosmological argument in a simplified syllogistic form is premise 1, everything that begins to exist has a cause. Premise 2, the universe began to exist. Conclusion, therefore, the universe has a cause. That's the short version of William Lane Craig's popular Kalam cosmological argument. There's a few problems with the premises before we even get into accepting its conclusion. First, how do you know the universe began to exist? While I'll agree intuition says it must have began to exist at some point, looking closer at our current understanding of the lambda CDM model, that is, the Big Bang model, we can see that the laws of physics run into a point where time is undefined, yet energy isn't. That's an unresolved problem. It's likely something fundamentally wrong with our current models of reality, but we cannot draw a conclusion that everything began to exist. This invalidates both premise 1 and premise 2, or at the very least, it gives us reason to not accept either of the premises. If we cannot conclusively prove that the universe began to exist, then the premises may not hold true. In order to proceed, we need to presuppose a beginning to existence. Even if we presuppose that reality itself began somehow, and I'm discussing the moment t equals 0 or earlier in the lambda CDM model, for which our math is undefined and thus currently unknowable, we cannot say that the universe itself began to exist because our model shows a singularity at the first Planck moment. That means something already existed. This is not creation ex nihilo, as the second premise would lean towards. That's pre-existing stuff in a configuration of reality we currently do not comprehend. And lack of comprehension doesn't mean it didn't exist. It just means we don't understand it. Now, on the face of it, I can accept the third premise by itself. As an empiricist, I don't need the prior two premises to accept that the lambda CDM event had a cause. What I need is a lot more evidence for what the cause is. As it stands right now, there is zero evidence for anything causing the lambda CDM event, but our prior observations indicate that causality is a series of prior events. The thing is, though, we don't know what the prior cause was. It could have been something or someone. It could also just be the fundamental laws of quantum mechanics that give rise to a universe, because the universe's existence might just be a brute fact of reality. The cause could also be that causality is not a thing in the strictest sense. Experiments in quantum physics have shown tantalizing hints that the idea of causality at the quantum level may need to be abandoned in order to further advance the field. And if causality at that size is out the window, then it's anybody's guess as to what the heck happened, if that concept of things happening even makes sense without causality. Now, here's my problem with what the presenter has said specifically. The proof of God's existence is creation itself. Creation is a loaded term. To have creation, as the word is defined, you must presuppose a creator. But we have no evidence of a creator. We have evidence of the lambda CDM event taking place and the laws of physics unfolding as they do from that first Planck moment, and that's it. There's no signatures, no timestamps, no debug logs, nothing to indicate that there was some lead developer that programmed everything and hit run. So to say that creation itself is your proof is fallacious reasoning. It might be enough to convince you to fall to your knees and worship a deity, but it's not proof.
Because the thing is, matter cannot be created nor destroyed. So who created the matter?
And this is exactly why I point out that creation is a loaded terminology. You're ascribing an intentional act of a sentient mind to something and leaping to asking who, when science hasn't even began to ask what or how.
And the thing is, God frequently says, I am the light, I am the light, I am the light. And the crazy thing about light is that it's massless. And all massless things move at the speed of light. But it gets even crazier. The thing with light is that light does not experience time. You heard that right. You can search it up yourself. Light does not experience time. And let me explain more of what I mean. So there's light years, time moves at a specific speed from one area or one spot to another spot. But the thing is, from the light's perspective, though it may have taken 100 years to travel from point A to point B, from the light's perspective, it's instant. It's instant.
Okay, let's tackle this in segments. Saying light does not experience time is a colloquialism to try and explain that in relativity, massless particles have no frame of reference. That is, there cannot be a point of view from the photon's perspective where time passes because the time between emission and absorption does not exist. We explain that as being instantaneous, but that's a misnomer intentionally designed to help people understand what's really going on. Light has no frame of reference in time. When you move at the speed of light, you move purely in a spatial dimension, not a temporal one. We can come to this conclusion thanks to the Lorentz transformation. The time dilation factor is calculated as dt equals 1 over the square root of 1 minus v squared divided by c squared. This goes to infinity as v approaches c, but when v equals c, we end up dividing by 0. So you cannot define a proper time t for a photon. You can't validly perform a Lorentz transformation to a photon's frame of reference. Therefore, it is meaningless to talk about what a photon experiences. We can also calculate proper time as t equals the function of square root 1 minus v squared divided by c squared times delta t, which, when v equals c, proper time equals 0. Sometimes people like to interpret 0 proper time as the photon doesn't experience time and say that when a photon exists, it instantly stops existing from its point of view, but that is inaccurate. That is not because there's a valid photon frame of reference. It's because we're projecting from a valid frame of reference where the math works. But the math where velocity equals the speed of light doesn't work. You cannot say light experiences no time because light's frame of reference is undefined. It's a common misconception that light experiences no time, but that is shorthand that breaks under closer scrutiny. In relativity, you can't define a valid reference frame for a photon, which means there's no point of view or timeline you can assign to light itself. Because the equation of special relativity breaks down at the speed of light, the math literally becomes undefined. So people might say light doesn't experience time. It's not that light exists in some timeless or eternal way like the Christian God is described as. It's that our framework doesn't allow us to assign a time coordinate to light at all. Light doesn't exist in time. It's not eternal, and it's not poetically timeless. It literally only travels through the spatial dimension. The proper time light experiences is 0. This doesn't mean that we understand what time is like for a photon. It means we calculate no proper time elapsing along its path. That is not the same thing as being instantaneous. Look, let me really ultra simplify this. Think of it like this. Imagine there's a sixth physical dimension, ignoring things like string theory. It's something we can't see, measure, or interact with. It's not part of our reality. Asking us what it's like to experience or travel in the sixth dimension is meaningless because it's not something our existence touches. Flip that around. For light, time is like our sixth dimension. It doesn't interact with it at all. Not because it's transcendent or magical, but because the math of relativity doesn't show that light moves through time. It only moves through space. In fact, its entire path through space-time is what we term null interval. That is, the distance traveled through time isn't just 0 seconds, it's non-existent. So just like you or I don't have a view of the sixth dimension, so too does time lack a view of a temporal one. Now, if we run with the sixth dimension analogy, a human doesn't exist outside the sixth dimension. We simply do not interact with it at all because it's physically impossible for us to interact with it. Similarly, light doesn't exist outside of time. It simply doesn't have a path through it at all. Its journey across space happens along the null interval, meaning the photon doesn't experience 0 time elapsed because that would be a time-based calculation. It literally does not experience time at all. It's not eternal because eternity implies an infinite timeline, but light doesn't have an infinite timeline. It has no timeline at all. So light isn't poetically timeless, it's untimed in the geometric physical sense. There's no clock to run slow or fast because there is no valid reference frame for a massless particle. Light isn't outside time, it's orthogonal to it. Using light's properties to argue for something beyond space and time is like using silence to argue for a universal language. You're taking absence of something and treating it as evidence of presence. But in physics, the absence of something is just absence. So when someone says God is light and then tells you light is timeless, what they're actually doing is committing a category error by confusing mathematical boundary with a metaphysical quality. That's not insight, it's ontological overreach.
So it makes you think, as Einstein's theory of relativity, that time is not constant. Time is not constant. Therefore, something can be outside of time. Something can be outside of time, space, and matter, the area that we are confined to. So creation itself is proof of God's existence.
And this is just a giant categorical error and a huge, unfounded leap of poor logic. They're conflating the scientific concept of time as a coordinate dimension with the metaphysical idea of timelessness as though they belong to the same framework. They do not. Time is not constant in relativity means that time flows differently depending on velocity and gravity. Under general relativity, time behaves differently under high speeds of gravitational fields, but it still exists. There is no such thing in physics as the concept of being outside of time. Just because time behaves differently under relativity doesn't mean something can be beyond it in a supernatural sense. That's like saying because temperature changes with altitude, there must be a point where temperature doesn't exist at all. That is a silly premise. The presenter is misusing, and I suspect misunderstanding, a scientific concept to justify a metaphysical claim, arguing that since time isn't absolute, something, God, can exist outside of time, space, and matter, and that something is the cause of the universe. But that's just a total non sequitur dressed up in scientific language. Nothing the presenter said here follows from the premises of relativity.
And I'm about to go even deeper, because as scientists, mathematicians, and physicists learn more about the universe, they start to realize that there is so much we do not understand, and a lot of the time it brings them closer to a higher power.
Every good scientist worth their salt will admit there's so much we don't understand. Otherwise, what would the point of science and the scientific method be? As far as bringing them closer to a higher power, I guess, maybe. I can certainly see a situation where looking at the vastness of the cosmos or digging deep into the mathematics of reality that one would be tempted to believe in a so-called higher power. It's pretty easy for the human brain to assign agency to something when there is none. So I don't see how this is an argument for anything other than a reinforcement of the presenter's own personal incredulity.
Because the truth is, our universe is fine-tuned.
What is it about theists and the fine-tuning argument that they find so compelling? Is it because it's an easy mental shortcut to make the leap from improbability to intentionality? Is it that anthropic bias makes our existence feel spooky? Is it just emotionally satisfying? Is it that the framing of the argument tricks people into thinking it's a valid logical argument? I don't get it. What is it about the fine-tuning argument that people find so compelling that it's one of the first arguments they shout from the heavens when they engage with apologetics?
So fine-tuned that if it was even off by a fraction of a decimal spot, we wouldn't have life. We wouldn't have life if hydrogen was slightly larger by the smallest tenth of a millionth point. We wouldn't have hydrogen stars, we wouldn't have oxygen, we wouldn't have water, and we wouldn't have life.
I have a simple counter to this. Prove it. Go ahead. Prove that if you change one constant of our models, that the very notion of life itself becomes impossible. Because the only thing you can prove with this argument is that we will likely not exist, but the definition of life is not human beings. In fact, the definition of life is actually pretty vague and ambiguous. I prefer to use NASA's definition, which states that life is any biochemical system that is capable of Darwinian evolution. If we use that definition of life, you're going to need a hell of a lot more than an assertion and an emotional plea to make your case. Do you have a supercomputer that can run the countless simulations and calculate the countless complex results of changing a singular constant in our models of relativity? Can you say, with actual empirical evidence, that any and all changes to these models will result in a completely lifeless universe, devoid of any and all biochemical systems capable of Darwinian evolution? No, you can't say that. You can assert it all you want, but the fact is that you haven't run those simulations. In fact, nobody has. Why? Because it's computationally too expensive and there's too much unknown about how things interact under different variables of the physical constants that we cannot say with any level of certainty that life is impossible without this exact configuration. Never mind that this is a terrible argument for the existence of an all-powerful deity. I mean, are you really saying that an omnipotent being is incapable of making a system function for life without different parameters? That an omnipotent being is somehow restricted in some way? Fine-tuning is such a silly argument. Just because we exist doesn't mean the universe was created for us to exist. It simply means we exist. Period. That's all it means. We're the result of billions of years of physical processes playing out.
So, our universe is fine-tuned to produce life.
Is it? Then why do we spend millions upon millions of dollars on projects like SETI, where we attempt to find signs of intelligence? I mean, we've spent so much time and effort listening and looking out to the vast cosmos, and we can't so much as detect a cosmic amoeba fart. If this universe is so fine-tuned for life, then where the heck is everything? This is the weirdest thing about the fine-tuning argument, because the exact opposite argument is a far better argument for the existence of a personal God. After all, if we are the only intelligent life in the universe, then clearly God made the universe to be our sandbox. But if the universe is fine-tuned for life, then we're just another statistic, borne out by how finely tuned the universe is, leaving us to the fate of an impersonal creator God that just didn't seem to care about us specifically. If the fine-tuning argument is true, then life isn't special. It's expected. It's not a miracle, it's a statistical inevitability. We are simply what emerges when the constants allow it to, no more special than mold growing in the right humidity. In the biggest twist of irony, a poorly tuned universe with only us in it is a far stronger case for a personal God, as it encompasses anthropic exceptionalism, classical theism, and biblical narrative. When you think about it, the fine-tuning argument leads us to deism, not theism. Under the fine-tuning argument, it is more likely that the God of the universe is some scientist observing their creation as some kind of experiment, rather than any personal God who listens to prayers, cares about your choices, or sends messiahs. Now, there are still arguments against this notion, and I'm not saying it's a very good argument, but I personally think that the poorly tuned universe argument is a way better one for the existence of an all-powerful God being that can just make things happen rather than needing some numbers to line up just right. Of course, this entire argument completely misunderstands just what the physical constants are. They're numbers that work in our mathematical models based on observation. They're not divine scripture, they're invented to give the language of science structure. When you bring up the fine-tuning argument, it displays a very obvious ignorance and confusion between fundamental reality and the parameters of our current best models of physics. These constants are just how we describe things based on our observations. If our measurements improve or our models evolve, those constants can change too, because they're not some magic numbers inscribed in a quantum field, but they're observations that fit our models. Heck, some of these numbers have changed over time. What we thought was the Hubble constant isn't a constant anymore, and our observations of redshift have shown that the Hubble number has changed over time, and it currently varies depending on the measurement techniques we use. We call this the Hubble tension. So when you say the universe is finely tuned, you're basing that on values we extracted from the universe using incomplete models. That's like saying your map of a forest proves the forest was designed because you drew the map by walking in the middle of the forest.
And I'm about to take it a step even deeper. And I'm about to tell you about the double slit experiment.
Oh no, not quantum woo. Please don't make an argument from quantum woo. Please, I'm begging you.
The double slit experiment is tracking how electrons move. And the thing is, we have a sensor on these two slits, and if we watch the electron, watch it with the sensor, it will either go into the left slit or the right slit. It will move like matter. However, if there is no one there or no sensors to observe the movement of the electron, it will move as a wave and create a pattern of 5-6 different slits on the wall.
I swear. The double slit experiment isn't magic, it's physics. So the double slit experiment is what happens when you fire photons at a detection grid, and in between the photons and the grid you place a wall with two open slits in it. The hypothesis is pretty rudimentary. If the electron is a wave, the repeated firing of electrons will display an interference pattern. If the electrons are a particle, only two lines of electrons would show up on the grid. When run without observation, and I'll get to that word in a moment, the multiple electrons create an interference pattern. So the electron is a wave, right? But the detection grid only shows a single electron at a time, not an interference pattern for the entire wave. So it must be a particle, right? But after firing multiple electrons, an interference pattern appears, so it's a wave and a particle? In order to determine which slit the electron is going through, you can attach a sensor to the two slits and determine which slit the electron goes through. Only when you observe the electron, instead of getting an interference pattern, you get two solid lines, one for each slit. This behavior is called wave-particle duality, and this is confusing if you don't understand what's going on. Individual pieces of quanta act as both a particle and a wave. They act statistically rather than deterministically. What makes this experiment seem like quantum woo-woo magic is the lack of understanding. First, the electrons are hitting a detection grid at the far end of the experiment. This is what causes the two patterns to appear. Interestingly, when you fire a single electron, or rather the lowest quanta of electron you can reasonably fire at the grid, you get a single impact on the grid. You don't see an interference pattern with just a single quanta of electron. It's when you fire multiple electrons over a long period of time that lets you see the interference pattern. That's interesting. Second, how do you observe an electron or photon? Your eyes cannot pick up a single quanta of a subatomic particle. It can only register a large packet of those particles, so the observation process must involve something else, wouldn't you agree? And indeed it does. The observation of the double slit experiment is active, not passive. In order to see just what the electron or the photon is doing, you have to essentially, in a very watered down description, hit it with another electron and measure its shadow. That's right, you're not directly measuring the electron. To do that would destroy the experiment thanks to the Heisenberg uncertainty principle and leave you without a pattern, or a completely random one, on the detection grid. So you take your measurement. That act of observing, read smacking the electron with another electron, collapses the wave function, thus causing the statistically indeterminate electron to now follow a deterministic path. That's it. It's not magic. Experiments in quantum physics are strictly physical phenomena that are fully measurable. There's no woo-woo going on here, no magical effects because an all-seeing eye collapsed the strange concept of a wave function that people have in their heads and turned observation into reality. Look, if all of that went over your head, let me explain it to you another way. Imagine you're watching a monkey in a field. The monkey will, eventually, do something. The potential list of things the monkey could do can be broken down into a list of statistically likely outcomes, which we'll label a wave function. But it's late and you're tired. You want to know what the monkey is going to do right now. So you smack the monkey on the head with a hammer and record the results. That is the single most crass and rudimentary way I can explain why the double slit experiment and all of quantum physics isn't magic. How the hell did I go from making arguments against high-level theistic apologetics to countering quantum woo apologetics?
Pretty much what I'm trying to say is that matter moves differently whether or not it's being observed or not. It moves as a frequency. Almost like a video game. If there's no one there to observe it, it's moving as a frequency.
What? I don't even know what this means. Matter does not move differently whether it's being observed or not. Quantum particles have their wave function collapse when they interact with stuff, but they don't behave differently if you close your eyes. It moves as a frequency? I mean, a frequency is a mathematical property of a wave, so a particle's wave function does have frequency as a property, definitionally, but to say matter moves as a frequency is so meaningless. That's like saying an orange tastes like the number 73. But this is where the presenter absolutely baffled me. Like a video game? I am so beyond stumped as to what this means that I actually went to ChatGPT, fired up the O3 model, and asked it for clarification as if I was missing something. And it came back with this: the O3 model, OpenAI's most advanced publicly available reasoning model, came back with 3 question marks. Dude, if you ever respond to this video, I am pleading with you. I am begging you. Tell me what the hell you're talking about. I don't care if your response is incoherent or cribbed from Darth Dawkins' greatest hits. Just tell me what you think you meant.
That's why I truly believe that self-talk, self-belief is real, because you are able to become the person that you envision yourself to be, because everything is in frequencies. Everything is in frequencies. And it makes you think deeper.
Oh, we've just completely left any reasonable arguments for the existence of God behind, have we? I wasn't expecting this to devolve into the laws of attraction with a quantum move filter, but honestly, this was the last place I expected to end up tonight. Like, seriously, we went from the Kalam cosmological argument to God declaring himself to be light, so God is actually God because relativity, to the fine-tuning argument, and the argument from quantum ignorance, and now we're at the laws of attraction. I mean, at this point, I may as well pretend I'm Sir Sick and respond to a pointless spirit science video.
Why is that? What is the proof that life is really, that reality is really physical? Because the thing is, it's not. And you have to recognize that maybe this isn't the real world.
And now we've taken yet another dramatic turn away from the laws of attraction into conspiracy-level simulation theory. We've abandoned epistemology at this point and entered into poetic existentialism. It's not wrong exactly, but it doesn't answer the question of whether God exists.
And I know that sounds crazy, but like, think about it. We're only here for 60, 70 years and we die. We come here with nothing, we end here with nothing. Except who we are internally. Because who are you internally? You got to really dig deep and think about that. Who are you internally? And that is really you.
I'm sorry, I must have gotten lost. I'm here for philosophical debate and scientific inquiry. Could you point me in the right direction?
So, the premise of what I'm trying to say The proof that you are looking for is right in front of you. God wants a personal relationship with you, and He is stretching His arm out to you, and it is just our job to just reach out to Him. Because God is real, and creation is the proof of God's existence. This is Real Rice Talks. Thanks for watching. I'll see you guys later.
None of that followed. I literally could not track what this presenter was talking about, nor how it ties back to the proof of the existence of an all-knowing, all-powerful personal creator, nor how it showed that this being supposedly wants a relationship with me, or why I have to be the one to reach out to this God, or why the all-knowing, all-powerful creator of everything needs my interaction to prove to me that it exists. I can see why the presenter went down the quantum woo path, because this kind of disjointed thinking is not conducive to rational, logical thinking. Honestly, I wrote 11 pages of this response script, and I'm still not sure what Rice was trying to say. If coherence were the goal, I could have just said blub, blub, blub for 20 minutes and made more sense. In the end, the real problem isn't just that arguments like these are bad, it's that they're used as shortcuts to certainty, bypassing logic, science, and self-reflection. If we want to move the conversation forward, we need to demand better of ourselves, because the stakes are too high in this world for quantum woo-woo metaphors and vibe. If you like what I'm doing and you enjoyed this, please drop a comment, a like, and subscribe, and hit the notification bell. If you want to chat with me, there's a link to my Discord in the description, as well as my Ko-fi account. If you could maybe throw me a coffee or two, that'd be really, really helpful. Thanks so much, and we'll see you next time.